be debating the motions of this House opposes the use of flagship species in conservation campaigns. In this round, I'm the chair, Feliani from Tanjung Pura. Judging with me are the amazing panelists Itiara Farunisa and Russell Davis. For all the observers in this round, please maintain decorum. Please also not record because you already recorded it on YouTube, so you can watch that later. And then the rest is to not go in and out of the room, just stay here, or if you want to go, just go out right now. And for the debaters, the time is 7:15. Maximize the time, and also if you need time later, you can request to the LO. And POI is highly encouraged, so please do so for better engagement. So without further ado, I'm calling upon the Prime Minister. And don't forget to use your microphone for those who want to POI, because if not, then it's not going to be clear in the audio output.
Check audible. Imagine that when I seen such a show, for instance, like conservation's campaign, I would like to just, watching the shows itself by not focusing on the issues that currently addressed by some certain individuals, for instance, like the government or even the corporations that, conducting the events due to, they want to helping the government in order to create like CSR and so on and so forth. We think that the conservation's campaign is just massive, for instance, it's open to public, which means that all public can accessibility open, and then, for instance, they could accessibility watch what exactly the flagship species that currently shows in the public, for instance. Second of all, it also involves many actors, for instance, like activists, societies, or influencer. So many viewers, for instance, they would not focus to the environmental issues that currently addressed. Meanwhile, they're only focusing on the influencer, for instance, that it's currently invited to the campaign itself, for instance, that currently, booming because the events would likely to be successful at the end of the day. It's likely harmful in the status quo right now because it would make the agenda or the purpose of environmental campaigns would not be achieving their goals because they would not finally solve the issues at the end of the day, because the viewers that they want to approach is just only focusing on the artists, for instance, on the influencer that they are invited. So at the end of the day, they will not achieve their goals at the very first place. And second of all, it will only make these campaigns finally hard to be organized because they cannot control whether the animal that they are showing, for instance, would be controllable. For instance, there will be like a circumstances that they cannot control the animal itself because they are exactly or already like wild animals, for instance, like Komodo or even like African elephants. They cannot control those things. Could be safety, for instance, for the viewers in order to make them able to watch the campaigns, safety at the end of the day. Third of all, talking about the conservation campaign, I think that conservation campaign also need like a feedback. They want to make sure that whether these kinds of events could finally or eventually succeed and they could achieve their goals. I think that the feedback would not exist in oppositions of the House. Why? Because they are only focusing on the show itself. They're not focusing on the environmental issues that currently, address things by the certain of activists or even the government's influencer that they want to achieve in the status quo right now.
Sure.
Later on. So the flagship animal itself, we are currently seeing the problem that we see the scarcities of the animals, for instance, the animal that almost punah, for instance, they are want to maintain this kind of things, but meanwhile, these things would not be achievable under opposition of the House because they cannot, maintain the safetiness at the end of the day. So why we need to oppose these flagship species in conservation campaigns? I think that the first things that we need to later on, in order to oppose this, we like what I have told you before, it would not solve the environmental issue. For instance, the issue of loss of field, the infrastructures that exist in the status quo right now. Lots of animals lost their home, for instance, because of due to the infrastructures that currently manufactured by the government. It will not solve at the end of the day by having this campaign, because the government doesn't directly confront the corporations, for instance, in order to make the infrastructures, for instance, is currently good, for instance, because they're only focusing on the profit-oriented that they want to have finally at the end. They want to help the corporations, for instance, in order to make them exist, in order to make their business finally sustain at the end of the day. They will not focusing on the environmental, because finally the corporations, for instance, that create the environmental issues would not be focusing on their side of the house. Before that, yes, OG.
Do you think that the identification or the ability for people to identify when the focus is diversified to the point that they cannot identify with a singular point that unites them is something that will make the campaign effective?
I would include that rebuttals to my argumentations. So that's the first point that what I have told you before. The environmental issue would not be solved at the end of the day because the government cannot confront like the core problems that exist in the status quo right now. Second of all, talking about conservation's campaigns, I think that it would be brought a lot of informations, for instance, and the information that brought in the campaigns is just not only focused in one campaign. For instance, they are focusing on the scarcities of species. For instance, they are focusing on the environmental on the infrastructures issue that caused the loss of home from the animals, for instance. A lot of information that exists in one campaign, only disturbing the audience focus in order to understand the currently issue, for instance, that exists in the status quo right now. So at the end of the day, the delta is that the audience will not focus, and it's just impossible for them to finally helping the government, for instance, in order to support their campaign, in order to support the movement, in order to make the animals, for instance, sustain and then preserve at the end of the day. So too much information will only burdening the society itself finally at the end of the day, because the only things that they see is just they're not intentionally seeing for the environmental issues. They're not intentionally seeing, for instance, the currently issues that brought by the government. But the only focus that they want to have is just focusing on the event or the agenda that they have. It's possible also for them to not focusing on the environmental issue, because the only thing that's possible for them is just to see the awards that exist in the campaign, because there are a lot of rewards, for instance, that exist in the conservation campaign at the end of the day. So why it's beneficial under opening government? I think it's beneficial because if we oppose this, because the governments directly could be the audience, for instance, directly can understand the issues that currently addressed by the activists or by the government, the stakeholders that conducting these conservation campaigns. Why is that so? Because they are focusing not only not a lot of issues, for instance, they are focusing on one specific issues. So they are know what actually is to do, what actually is the animals that currently, protecting at the end of the day. So that would be beneficial under the opening government, because finally the audience could understand, oh, I should, protect these animals because these animals is currently scarce, for instance, and I should not do this kinds of infestation because the government have confirmed me in order to not to do so, because they understand enough, for instance, how exactly the environmental issues exist, and for that reason, proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Now I'm calling upon Leader of Opposition.
Panels, flagship species are refers to iconic animals who often become a representative for such a kind of habitat they coming from. And in terms of conservation campaigns, there's two clarification and set up in this debate. First, just because we are utilizing a particular species as the icon for the campaign doesn't mean that we ignore the needs of the other species. And secondly, our burden is to prove which method is more strategic to gain public awareness to opt into conserving and the environment. Response to the OG. OG only focusing on only ignoring the fact that people always curious about something. OG ignoring the fact that people always wanted to know what happens in the status quo, always to know what kind of information that they can get for such a conservation campaign itself. If they said that this could disturb audience issue, it's not true, because people always curious and people would likely to know when they are get the information for such a my panda get hurt, so they wanted to know why my panda get hurt, and they wanted to know what the conservation and environmental issues that this bring in this campaign. And even if this hard to organize what kind of thing that animal with representative, I think it's not exclusive, because the environmentalists was always to know what kind of the market and what kind of things that they need to take a step into to focusing, and what kind of things so they could recognize by the public. And it's not just not focusing on just one environmental issue, because like what I said in the setup before, we are not ignoring the needs of the other species. We are not ignoring the needs of the other environmental issue, because we bring this representative animal to simply to gain public attention, to people to know what kind of thing that there is environmental issue we need to focus. So I'm gonna talk about my argument. First, we're gonna talk about the moral awareness and why it will relate in terms of the people were to know what kind of things that this animal representative and what kind of the benefits that we bring if we bring this flagship species. First, the moral awareness. When we are morally aware of the things we identify, we are more willing to care. We are willing to more to take care. When the fact that we know, we recognize this animal, we recognize the flagship species, we recognize what that we feel kind, we feel knowing, we feel that we have the same terms and we synonymously in the same habitat with these animals, and this kind of moral awareness will gain a care attention from the public, from the people that even beforely that doesn't even taking care about the recognition of the environmentalists. Maybe there are some people that are just caring for panda are cute, tigers are cute, that Komodo are cool. Maybe there are some people of that. So when we bring this flagship species into conservation campaigns, these people are just taking care about the cuteness of these animals, with also curious why my favorite animals bring in this conservation campaigns, what are the problems and what are these issues that this environmentalist brings, and why I need to take care of it, and why I need to save these animals. It exists because when we relate to that particular being, we feel more care, will gain so much attention to this. Like I said, these people are that people is really curious about this in the status quo. I mean, even in social media, informations are really faced to take it away by the people. People will recognize every kind of things that happens in this world, that happens in this conservation era, in the conservation campaign. So these people that before that doesn't even having a care attention to this to the environmental issue, that they already just recognize the animal, they will care attention about this environmental issue. And why we need to relate to this? For two reasons. It terms a part of our subsistence identity, and there is internalization past us to care. First, why is this subconscious identity is very important? First, for the example, Komodos, it's synonymously to Indonesia. When there is something that bad happened to this kind of Komodo, we will recognize, we will knowing, we will paying attention what kind of thing and what kind of the bad things and this issue that brings such a harmful situation to our Komodo. We bring to so much care and attention to and recognize this kind of things, the environmental issue that we are not just bring to so much like kind of things that Komodo just being just getting harmful, but we take a look into what kind of environmental issue that bring a harmful situation to this Komodo, and this synonymity informs us that their suffering is one of that we indirectly experience. We will directly to propose what kind of thing that we need to take a best for this Komodo. And secondly, this internalization push us to taking care because it is also representative to our own identity, our country. So we need to taking care and we need to save this Komodo. We need to save this kind of animal. And like the China also protect what kind of the best for the panda, and there's always conservation campaigns for the panda. And secondly, a moral burden to protect and alleviate their suffering. We need to protect this kind of animals and avoid them from the suffering even more because we recognize this animal. So moral awareness is likely when we are able to realize to them, and when we are already realize to them, we already recognize the other kind of environmental issue that brings in this conservation campaigns. What the benefits if we support these practices to use in the conservation campaigns? First, it's conscious effort to care from the animals because there will so much effort from the people, and secondly, more support and attention for the campaign because the campaign itself will gain so much attention for the public, and lastly, it's likely over manifestation of the conservation because the conservation itself will gain much attention for the public. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you to Leader Opposition for that speech. Now calling upon Deputy Prime Minister to continue their case.
Audible? Yeah. Just raise your hands. Do not make any noise because I have attention issues. I think the opening opposition will make the misunderstanding will be much in the side of the house. Why? Imagine if you are see the Cendrawasih, for example. Meanwhile, in status quo, Cendrawasih has a lot of species that take for undertaken the law. Okay, the Cendrawasih flagship is very beautiful to attract. It's beautiful to see. But meanwhile, there is a lot of another Cendrawasih who having this kind of environment problems coming from the for example, like from company or something, etc. Meanwhile, the people are only based on this conservation campaigns only know about those flagship Cendrawasih rather than another another under flagships Cendrawasih that exists in status quo. When the moment when OO said, I think they are not strategic at all because it's not representative at all as a whole of the Cendrawasih, for example. For example, that Cendrawasih has suffering on the forest, for example, that the problem is that some of the people is misunderstanding that Cendrawasih that good color, for example, that have to be undertaken the law, for example. But when they said identity flex, I think the identity flagship is very differential in status quo. Is that the society in their Saura house cannot attract the real problems later. Meanwhile, the thousand of species in undertaking the law. But the mind washing also will be exist in Saura house, and the misleading of communication will be integrated on my speech. But before that, some clarifications. I think when it's not gain the public awareness, because awareness doesn't exist because first is because too much information for the flagship species, for example, but second of all, see the influencer viewers sit down. How the likely moral awareness exists in our house? But I think ignorant people will be doesn't care about your problems. In the end of the day, only care about how the beautiful the Tirtayasa, how the cute panda real in their house. But before that, we think that the flagship species in our house that my prime minister already told you that those animals that easily recognized is a very rare animals. Firstly, the rare animals, for example, but second of all, those animals which can impact of many of environmental problems, like the human because of the human being, for example, because I think this is not related with the conservation efforts, because in the end of the day you only campaign those flagships rather than 1,000 millions of another species. How does status quo look like then? They use conservative campaigns to, effort to the forest, for example, but open the land, for example, but it is not relevant at all. And then we, remember that all of these species, for example, from different area, for example, they have to move, they have to bring those kind of things and then bring the animals. It's very hard to them because this only for the representative. And how about the another species that the same species but the sit down. But why use the flagship species for the conservation campaigns could not be justified. But secondly, how is it beneficial in the end of the day? But firstly, it's the harmful from that animals, because we have the natural habitants, for example. They are too great to be used, for example, because in the status quo, the attraction to the public, but we think in the end of the day, the people is unlikely to understand what the meaningful of the conservation wants to do, but the conservation information that the feedback isn't in your house, and the goals cannot achieve in the end of the day. But third of all, my PMs already told you that it's not the real object of the habitants, for example. This is not the specific issues that we have faced in the status quo right now, because you will make the confusing campaigns, because on that the real campaign, because information that you attract to the conservative people, for example, they only care about those Chandrawasih rather than another specific issues. But first of all, it's a very useless, because the campaign in your house does nothing, because there is no result coming from the opening opposition. Why is there is no likelihood coming from the opening opposition? Why the people is likely to be care or to be aware about this kind of a thing, and it's still lacking and not solve the problems in the end of the day. And then I think this is a very beneficial from OG, because the real information, if you want to do the real information in the Sahara house, it's very educated in the right way, right? You have to educate them in the right way, the misleading on information, for example. But at least in our Sahara house, they have some kind of the species, but this flagship, more than awareness will be exist in our Sahara house, because they open their eyes, because there's a lot of another species that undertaken law is being suffering right now. But recognizing will more exist in our house, because the gray animals coming from is that undertaken on the law will be exist. But before that, okay, CO.
Please clarify how conservation campaign looks like in the government world.
Okay, the conservation that we mean, that we use we use the flagship animals to do the campaign by the magazine, for example, or some seminars, for example, rather than they use the specific information that the flagship animals, it's already in the status quo, is very undertaken the law, that we already know, all of us, that they are undertaken the law and is a very crucial. But another fact that the most of the animals that have suffering from the illegal logging, for example, or the legal chains, for example, are more same kind of the species, but different type of the flagships in the reserve of the house. That's what we want to pursue, and it's a bit to protect many gray area animals that have the same kind of types, species, for example. But we think is why we need to oppose. For example, it's too much in violence and in informations that perhaps suffering in information in the very weak, for example, because why is it beneficial in our house? Audience directly still understand, but why these animals is very, have to undertake the law, and then the campaign in our house will be result in result in the in good way, for example, because at least in our house, people have to aware there is kind of another animals. Meanwhile, in rest of the house, there is no, how does unlikely this particular people will understanding in meaningful that way to be used in animal, and very proud to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Now I'm calling upon Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Nanti maksudnya dibiarkan nanti. As a social movement that relies on the awareness of people to care, you ought to make their ability to access your agenda to be easier. What we want to clarify firstly is that human life is complex as it is already. We have to care about our jobs, we have to care about our education, we have to care how, say for example, we get our say for example nutrients 24/7 for from 9 to 5. We think that idea implies that we do not have the ability to fully care or have the knowledge to extensively understand the specificities of what the environment requires, the specificities of what these species require with all of its diversity. I think before I continue, I want to address OG firstly, because there's their case is entirely false, but also they've never given to you a comparative. So I'm going to touch on that first. One, there's the thing that they try to justify basically, that one, people don't have the inherent knowledge or understanding to care to begin with. Two, that it will create misunderstanding. Three, you're going to say for example, I don't know, don't care about certain species that are also important. I think the example that they want to bring is Cendrawasih from Papua. We can also do that. We can also try and engage with that. Say for example, if we want to get social attention from Papua, we can use Cendrawasih as a flagship species for the campaign there. We think that's possible. But secondly, notice that they subconsciously agree that people don't understand about the specificities of these things. Meaning that if you diversify the focus of your campaign to care about the diverse species and all of its specificities, at the very, very best, you make people less interested because they don't know about all of these things. They have an inability to access the agenda to begin with, so you ought to make it easier for them to begin with. They're going to be more there's going to be more misunderstanding on their side inherently because you diversify the focus, and we don't think as an environmentalist movement this is something that you want, especially if your agenda, if your main goal is to get social awareness and support. What I will do here is a couple of things done. I'm going to talk why necessarily identification of people's identification of the agenda is going to happen much more better on our side. I'm going to clarify the universal impact that you're going to get exactly when people buy into this. Thirdly, I'm going to touch upon why it's much more effective. Fourth, I'm going to touch why necessarily it's going to create better accessibility. And lastly, I'm going to talk why the scale of conservation under our side is going to be larger. So firstly, on the idea of identification. We think by virtue of people's limited ability to identify, and no, inherently, you ought to make it easier. Why does it making it easier is important? Because when people are already have many different agendas, you need a unifying goal or symbol to make sure that society cares to begin with. The importance of the idea of moral awareness from my first LOC speech is to say that people care more when they identify and they have they can trigger the moral awareness that is inherently within them to begin with. This is a principle that is very basic, that is very much a necessity for social movement to say for example want to run all of their agenda. This is why say for example feminism works, because they touch upon the moral awareness that women's position is something that is unfair currently to begin with. Therefore you get more moral support and also actual support from women and also men under the current status quo, because you focus on that particular identity. That principle still runs here. Secondly then, why it's going to be more effective? We think when you make jobs, like the job for people to identify, it ease up like the ability for people to want to like care to begin with. This makes the ability for the social movement to gain like social capital and the ability to have interest and like say for example, the amount of attention from the public that much more easier. When that process is easier, it makes the process of like gaining support and gaining actual like contribution to the environment and preservation much more likely, because you get more like say for example effort in like people people opting into that particular agenda, meaning that there's more effort and contribution, be it monetary, be it resources, those kinds of things. These are things that are inherently like that are inherently going to be beneficial in the idea of conservation. This makes the process effective and this makes the process efficient. At the very, very least, if we can prove that the, like say for example that like the best case scenario cannot happen under our side, at least worst case, you get better attention, you get better effectivity of the process by virtue of that. Thirdly then, why it makes it, say for example, more accessible? Because when people are like spoon-fed the things or like you are unified in their interest to protect a particular idea that they like define themselves and also is something that they relate, it's much more easier for people to access. This is the reason, say for example, Indonesia uses Komodo as a symbol of its nation because it invokes, say for example, Indonesian pride and Indonesian identity. This makes people much more related to that, because inherently when state, but also like when people subconsciously understand that this represents a part of their identity, it means that all the suffering that they feel are also a part of their experience. It means that when they don't, say for example, help, they're going to prolong the suffering of the Komodos, which means prolong the suffering of Indonesia, which means it's something that also identify with them as well as an Indonesian. We think on all instances this is something that is likely, and we think this is something that is very contributive. Fourth then, on the universal impact. We think when you care about like, say for example, animals in general, what you do isn't just to like, say for example, oh, give food to like these animals and those kinds of things. You're also going to like care about the, like say for example, plantation, the forestation that surrounds these animals to begin with, the ecosystem that they live on to begin with, that are very important, very fundamental to their livelihood. So we're going to also help other species as well. Like if, like say for example, we're going to care about Komodo, like in Komodo Island, we're going to also like give them like say for example, forestation, which is going to be helpful because it creates like say for example, nutrients for other beings as well, like birds or like monkeys and those kinds of things, and that are inherently going to form part of that ecosystem. So the universal impact is there to begin with, and it's something that is much more likelier to happen when you create that support and you get that support effectively as well. Lastly, then on the scope of like conservation, we think when there's social capital, then an abundance of that social capital, you're going to have the legitimacy to ask, like say for example, the state to want to also conserve it. This is only part, like the preservation of Komodo can only happen under status quo when there's a lot of people that demands that Komodo needs to be protected because it forms the identity of Indonesia as well. It means that you can get legitimate support from states as well that are much more effective and much more abundant in resources to help conserve these animals to begin with. For these reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Now starting the closing half, a member of government.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. They said, the OO said that we need a symbol to address the problem, right? We'll show you on why the symbol itself is problematic and doesn't represent the whole problem. You don't want the rich people to represent the poor, right? The opening clashes are more fixated against who is getting more audiences, and all are fixated on who is more accessible to get this kind of information, which we believe is not exclusive, and we'll tell you on why later. Right? OO believes promoting flagship species is needed to get more audiences. We disagree We disagree because the problem like forest fire, extinction, and climate change is enough as a problem to get into headlines and then to actually get audiences to pay attention into the fundamental problem that is happening. That is our mechanism. As opposed to using flagship species, we're actually showing the fundamental problem that is very problematic, that is actually endangering the whole habitat. That is enough to be used as the whole headline, right? But even then, we believe our side is getting audiences, opening opposition is getting audiences. We believe our side is far better because at least we're attracting audiences that is actually interested in the most fundamental problem. Thus, we believe creating a better and faster response to the fundamental problem that is happening towards the whole habitat, right? Let's actually characterize and then view and see on how society would actually look at these conservative campaigns. We believe they would actually view them, this conservative campaign, using this flagship method more as an entertainment as opposed to showcasing the real problem, right? By showcasing the animals' charismatic characteristic as opposed to the real problem first. For example, we're using Komodo as an entertainment symbol as opposed to the need of conservatives problem, right? People would actually take a more serious stance when you showcase the serious and fundamental problem that is threatening the whole habitat, and we believe it is actually much more favorable when you showcase the real problem first, right? So understand first, what does the conservative campaigns purpose in the first place, or what are their goals, right? We believe first is they want to educate the people and the society about the fundamental problem that is threatening the whole habitat. Secondly, spreading awareness about the conservation of the habitats, and then of course to conserve the whole habitat, which is a given, right? We'll show to you on why the use of this flagship or why the use of this method will not effectively achieve that purpose. Our goal as the CG is to actually and effectively portray the whole problem and habitat to actually get more people and more quality people to jump into this kind of problem and addresses the problem and then getting this problem into headlines, right? No. First, let's showcase the problem of this method, the problem of this mechanism, right? What would happen if you use flagship method? We believe you're going to overshadow the real problem and other species in this habitat, right? You're imposing and promoting this charismatic animal characteristics as opposed to showcasing the real problem. First, for example, let's save the Bengal tigers and showing their beautiful and unique characteristic that needs to be saved, while overshadowing the whole problem like forest fire, climate change, and why the problem extinctions is happening in the first place, right? Understand that it is very likely for society being fixated on the characteristics, not seeing the real problem first, seeing on this beautiful and charismatic characteristics of these animal flagships, and we believe that is very bad, as mentioned before. They're going to the reason for that is why it is very likely because they're taking advantage of people fixation on beautiful things, right? This promotes the idea that only iconic, beautiful, and charismatic issues or animals should be saved, right? Not the whole habitat, and we're not looking at the most fundamental problems, right? This is also promoted by the idea on how people are more sympathetic towards bunnies, cute and beautiful animals, cute and beautiful bunnies, as opposed to the ugly rats when we're talking about the horrific experimental subject, right? They are taking advantage of those people views, and we believe this is very problematic because you're not addressing the real issue and you're not attracting the real problem into the discourse and into this promotion and into this conservation campaigns, right? We've shown you on why using this method already fails the purpose of the campaigns and why our mechanism is far better in attracting more people and also more people who actually jump into the problem, right? First of all, by using this method, you're not educating people effectively. You're not showing the fundamental problem that is actually threatening the whole habitat. You're only showing that Bengal tigers are being threatened and they're going to be extinct. Let's save these Bengal tigers, right? You're not showing on why this problem occurs in the first place. And we believe using forest fire as a headline is more effective, right? You're not spreading awareness as you're raising the wrong awareness. You're raising the wrong things as awarenesses, and this is principally unjustified because while the whole habitat is suffering, we are only showing a flagship animal or one animal that is pretty, that is charismatic, that is beautiful. This is principally unjustified. So instead of using this mechanism of flagship species, using our mechanism of promoting the fundamental problem that is actually very alarming and is very important and doesn't really fall behind flagship species is actually very much important and will actually get more people attention into this kind of problem that is happening near their area or is happening into the world, right? We believe using the real problem, the real important and severe problem as as headlines is far better in getting more audiences, in getting more influences, getting more qualified people into this kind of discourse and into this kind of problem. And we believe this achieves the conservative campaign purpose that we've showed, that we've mentioned to you before. That is all. Thank you.
I thank the deputy, the member of government for that speech. Now, from the closing opposition, please welcome opposition member.
Can I get a timer, please? I'm sorry. Check. Okay. In opening government, they want people to see the real situation, while in opening opposition, they want people to they want these campaigns to be used with flagship animals because they want identity and they want a unifying symbol. In closing government, apart from being repetitive from opening government, the real case is only the principle that it is unfair to only showcase a single entity when there are many things that is really bad, right? I think the key question in this debate remains the same with the opening. Which side can spread awareness and harness support to begin with? I think CG cannot just come to this debate and kick out this urgency, right? Because this is the goal of our movement on both benches, right? So our contribution is as simple as to tell you why then with using this flagship animal, you will get a better internalization within the grassroots and achieve all goals in opening opposition. It is as simple as closing opposition will mechanize all the impacts because we believe our opening hasn't really talked about this yet, right? All the impacts are grandeur, wonderful, but this mechanization is extremely important because this is the main questions coming from both government benches. But you also need to understand that closing opposition case of mechanization is also the prerequisite of all cases coming from government bench, right? I think that the moment you cannot really spread awareness and gain support, I think even if people understand the real problem, you can't really do things, right? But firstly, independent rebuttals to a closing government principle. I think that this principle is not that important, right? I think representation is something very common in human history. You choose someone to represent you in the houses, for instances. So I think just because we take one animal and use it as a representation of the bigger problem doesn't mean that we suddenly become principally unjustified, right? But moving on to the the cases coming from opening government. I think that in both government benches, the real problem is we never see a real way of them opposing the use of flagship animals, right? They only they say that there's a problem within opposition, that how we try to move the animal into the different area and we hurt the animals, right? 3 responses. Number 1, I don't think this is necessarily true because in this era, you can use these flagship animals in many ways, right? i.e. maybe making a mascot like Gutsy, for instances, or etc. So I don't think that the case of hurting animal is very important here. But second, I think there is a confusing stance on the government bench. When I give the POI to ask them to clarify what actually the opposing looks like on government bench, this basically simply say that they want to use the flagship animals, so somehow opposition bench is very confused in this matter. But number 3 then, even if it is true that we hurt the animals on some instances, I think the cost and benefit analysis still justifies our means, right? If we can garner the support from many people and try to make change in environmental laws, I think that hurting 1 or 2 pandas is really, really just, right, on our side. But yeah, welcome to closing opposition case. I think that what both opening benches has forgotten in this debate is how the conservation campaign and how people look into this campaign to begin with, right? I think in the current status quo, we see many different variations on how people try to do this campaign, right? Like, look, many countries have many different existing problems with all the flora and fauna within it. I think exactly because every country have different priorities, somehow they need to make an identity, because I think there is a competition exists between these both countries on whose problem is the most important. But number 2 then, we should concede that the awareness from the people is still on the very low, right? People in general don't really care about environmental problems, right? Some people even still think that it is hoax, some thinks that it is not that important comparatively to humans' needs, right? This means in two things. Number one, many information exists in the current status quo, right? Which means that with your limited brain capacity and everyday receiving many informations, most of the time because you don't care about this information, you just tend to forget it anyway, right? Because you see it as trivial and not important. But number two then, it also means that people are not interested with regular or generic way of campaign, right? Now then, this is where you need a flagship animals, right? For reasons. Number one, we think that the moment you have a uniqueness, it means that you have the identity among different spectrum of campaign. Number two, then, we believe that uniqueness is something special and is more easily recognized and instilled within people's mind, right? As this is how humans' minds works. We catch differences quickly. We identify a uniqueness among a crowd of others, right? The moment you see someone wearing a black shirt within a white shirt crowded, you will notice that person immediately. This is where uniqueness is very important on how human thinks mentally. But thirdly, I think that you love something slowly, right? I think the process of someone loving something starts from the smallest introduction first. Just when you see your love of your life, for instances, you look at the outside features before you know more and look into the inside of the said person. We think the way people love environment is still the same, right? You need to love some aspects of it first before you can gain the more deeper understanding of the bigger picture on what happened in the environment. But number three then, I think flagship animals is important because they are already small in numbers to be given with, right? Given that you have these animals in small number, it gives a sense of urgency to the people. Imagine using, brown bears, for instances, whether it's big in number, or maybe using chickens or pigs as a way to promote environmental problems. I think this doesn't give people any sense of urgency anyway, because these things are big in number to begin with. That's why you need a flagship animal that is already small in numbers. Hence, it will give people a sense of urgency, because without this, people will keep staying inside the illusion that nothing really happens in the current status quo, right? What is then the impact? But before that, I'll take OG if there's any. CG? All right, cool. So number one, I think the impact is better engagement, right? The moment the grassroots loves this cute animal, for instance, or cute animals, they will try to do things like maybe sharing fun facts about Komodo, or maybe they share cute videos about pandas doing silly things, or etc., right? This means that grassroots engagement will exist on our side. But then why then this is important? One, notice that OG say that currently awareness is non-existent in the grassroots, right? Corporations can exploit the nature the way they like. This is where you need grassroots engagement. This is where you want to garner their support and somehow make them act for change, right? With the power of number and the mob, right? This is where the grassroots will take actions the moment they feel like this urgency happens and we need to take actions, right? The importance of this argument is simple. Because our goal is awareness, I think the side that can prove to you how we can garner the biggest support should win this debate, right? On opening government, this case of CO is the prerequisite of our case of understanding, right? Even if you have big understanding, if the number is small in the very first place, then your understanding becomes nothing because it cannot materialize in the world. But on opening opposition, this mechanized their case, right? Because opening opposition only talk about moral awareness without any process analysis on how people will internalize this and suddenly become caring with the nature, right? This is where closing opposition wins the debate we proudly oppose.
I thank the member of opposition for that speech. Now to please welcome Government Whip.
Just address me as Government Whip. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are 3 concerns fall onto OG. Firstly, there are no explanation onto the likelihood of why then people are going to shift their focus and overshadow the real problem of the society. Secondly, not only focusing onto the wrong urgencies, but we explain to you that under CG onto how with the usage of these flagship species will lead to people focusing on the wrong problem, right? The problem is not charismatic animals are dying. The problem is animals are dying because of forest fire or because etc. problems, right? Secondly, OO and CO cases, I think they failed that the fact that exactly because not only charismatic animals are dying, not only charismatic animals needs protection in the very first place, right? But then secondly, I think opposition bench failed to notice that the brutal story of many animals are dying, forests and habitats are burned down, also and even exclusive to pull empathy rather than uniqueness, where you specified, where you spoon-fed people and now people hyperfixation are not fueled by empathy, but the feeling of entertainment, the feeling of awe in the very first place. Later, I'm going to bring to you two things, right? About the principality of the usage. I'm going to compare their method with government's, specifically CG's method, right? But then secondly, I'm going to talk about the audiences, right? Because even if both sides have quantity, we have better quality, and I'm going to explain to you why then quality overshadowed quantity. The quality of audience actually overshadowed the quantity in the very first place, right? Before that, yes.
In all due respects, how do you identify with a tree when it's literally a dead thing? When like the fact is, deforestation fires in Australia and US is still rampant even now with the focus on trees.
I think I'm going to explain it in principally exactly how do you say it, right? What do we told you on the CG, right? Firstly, the problem in the status quo does not affect only the charismatic animals, which means that all types of animals, all types of habitats are going to be there, right? But then secondly, exactly because Kak Kenny told you, exactly human is inherently biased to shift their focus as something that is eye-catching, right? They shift the problems and not going to be, their focus are not going to be put into something that is really the problem. For example, all animals are dying because of forest fire, right? Under their side of the house. Thirdly, you are taking advantages of people hyperfixation to actually focus onto something that impose the idea of beauty matters. That's why we going to care about charismatic people. We're going to care about Bengal tigers. We're going to care about Cendrawasih because they are charismatic, because they are unique in the very first place. This kind of principality is not the symbol that you want to use under CG, right? Because if you search symbol, you search a symbol that represented the problem, not the 50% of the demographic, right? Fourthly, we told you onto how this principality, our method, aligns with what the conservation campaigns actually wants to do, right? Firstly, we want to educate people and society, not hyper-fixating them for something that is not a problem in the very first place. But then secondly, we want to spread awareness, right? We told you onto what kind of awareness we want to actually spread is the awareness of the problems itself, the real problems, not the awareness about some demographic of animals are dying in the very first place, right? But even if that is not the case, right, I'm going to explain to you onto why then exactly because humans are diversified, when you focus on this kind of uniqueness, people will actually preview this as something that's entertainment, right, in the very first place, right? That's why Indonesian people never actually care about the Komodo dragons because they are actually facing problems. They care about the Komodo, they actually view Komodo dragons as something that is cool, as something that is like entertainment, to actually entertain them in the very first place, right? I'm going to talk about the audiences then, right? How do we actually get the quantity of audience, right? What did they say onto you, right? Firstly, they said onto how looks can actually lead into empathy, where where can they incentivize people to actually care, right? Panels know, I think looks, charismatics does not lead to empathy in the very first place, right? Because exactly how the uniqueness overshadowed the shift in the very first place. It leads to entertainment at best, exactly because opposition said onto how humans' focus are already diversified in the very first place, right? The parallel example onto how you go to zoos, you don't care about the animal stories, you care when animals do backflips, do entertainments of how beautiful they are in the very first place, right? Secondly, I think their method to search empathy is not exclusive, right? Because in the status quo, and how Kak Kenny say to you, environmental activists is still there, those kind of campaign is still there, but better because we oppose the kind of using flagships. Now under our mechanism, we use real problems as promotion, such as focus on saying that animals are dying, their habitats are burned, and exactly, if it is enough for you, if empathy is really something that you really needed in the first place, right? But secondly, even if both sides got quantity that they needed, right? Why then, even if under our worst case scenario, we don't get that many audiences as and side opposition, we say we give you and guarantee you the quality of audience. And why this is important, right? Firstly, we told you the way is that under their method, the type of audiences that you get, even if they really care, even they are about the flagship species, their empathy are limited to the echo chamber. Why so? Because exactly how the campaign imposing and doctrinizing these audiences to form that, to actually impose to this audience minds, to exactly told to you onto how this kind of only echo chamber is the only demographic of animals that is dying, right? But then secondly, under our method, audiences who understands now and do not hyperfixated are something that audiences who actually knows about the problem, who actually knows why then Bengal tigers and other animals actually be extincted in the very first place of the house, right? Why then this is important? Because on the Kakeni Social, the purpose of campaign itself is to spark discourses, right? To spark discourses, to make people aware and to spread it to another type of society in the very first place, right? Why then this discourses is going to happen, right? Because our output is there. Our output is clear, right? We have audiences who make the right discourses, the whole discourses, to fix the real problems, the rooted problems, not only those problems that are flagship because of beauty, because of charismatic in the very first place, right? What do we prove under CG, right? Firstly, our mechanism is already enough for people to pull their empathy in the very first place, right? Because if empathy is the one that you do, the one you want to pull, then you should impose the problems, not the beauty of the problems itself in the very first place. Therefore, so proud to propose.
I thank the government whip for that fine speech. Now let's go with the last speech from opposition whip.
All right, sorry for that. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. They say we can't showcase the real problem in opposition. Number one is that member of opposition has told you that this can act as a clickbait to make people attracted first before they care. The second thing is that you can't just insert the problem inside the campaign on our world. You can say orangutan is dying because of the CPO companies killing them. You can say koala is dying due to the Australia forest fire. So I think CG case is inexclusive. Next then is if quality is the main concern, in opposition world, we believe that they exist on both sides anyway, assuming that they are already nature loving to begin with. The delta is on who can attract the general public. Who can attract the general public? The answer is using the flagship animal. Environmentalist, nature lover, professors, etc., like these courses or etc., also exist on closing opposition, so don't buy CG case. Okay, next. I'm going to review what from the Prime Minister said, that is that Prime Minister's main idea is about this conservative campaigns will only focusing on the views like influencer as it only for the profit goal, not the environmental, without making a clear mechanism on how conservative campaign looks like if my first speaker don't ask for POI. So we think that here Prime Minister antagonized the social media benefits as the tools for raising the awareness, because all of us in here main goal is for the awareness for a conservative environment. Two responses that comparing on two things, while on their side of the house that they want the conservative look in a seminars and the magazine. We think that with social media, it's actually more beneficial under two things. Is that the first is the accessibility. With social media, is that you can. We think that the seminars is not accessible for everyone. Who can join the seminars outside of the students, outside of the workers, outside of the people who actually have institutions? So they have actually to go. No, for the awareness of for the bigger audiences to attract more people is that the using of social media such as Facebook. You know that everyone has smartphones now. The beneficial is more, it's more in the social media. And then the second, if we want to raise the conservative environment for a quicker result, is that social media that they think that they antagonize it because it have likes, views, and the influencers that will only ignore the main problem and ignore the main issues and the problem and the main problem. So that is the thing that we are very regretting. So the thing is that we can see how for an illustration is that we can see that how in the feminist footsteps actually 4 years ago. The thing with the power of the Taylor Swift lyrics are all or like a movie or like the TV shows and Netflix that push awareness of the feminist itself is that because like my first speaker has told you that because you can see panda figure like here, it's just like how you see Taylor Swift everywhere because you live with it. That is why get into your brain because there is a uniqueness in there so that because not everyone has like the brain capacity. Not everyone have like not everyone can catch the information that is hard, such as the seminars, such as the magazine, or such as like the journals. Is that the thing that live with us, the thing that near us, that is the thing that you have to make first. So that's like the first step for the public awareness first, because not everyone, as like my first speaker said, not everyone care about these animals. Not everyone actually care about the public awareness, etc. But we want them to care, right? So this is the first thing first.
Point.
And then the next thing is that, they told you that. Okay, they told you about this will only ignore the main problem because at the end of the day they only care about like how much money, how much profit, how much thing that this company as me the one that made this, how much money would I make? So then actually what are the main goal of to save these animals actually? So we think it seemed like even though it's business, it still have the mutualism. It still have the fortune on both sides. If you want to raise something, you actually need some profit to start it. So if you actually made seminars or etc., you actually still have to providing money for getting people gathering in the house. So yeah. So back to our main point is that the important of the existence of the uniqueness is that the eye-catching thing, the figure all over you, the thing that is near you is important because in the current status quo where not everyone is very well educated. Just take an example. If it's Indonesia, we can see like there's only less than 20% that actually well educated. Even we're in here, or even people that are educated is not actually care about those things. So that is far from. Thank you.
All right, I thank the opposition whip for that speech, and I thank all the speakers in this round. So you may leave this room and then go back to UTCC, and good luck for round 9.